Greetings from San Diego, California. This interactive multinational teleconference is reaching you live in English and Spanish through a unique and complex international telecommunications network via satellite, microwave, and cable. This program brings together distinguished institutions representing education, business, and government in more than a dozen countries in the Americas and Europe. We look forward to hearing from you. The ITC is proud to once again acknowledge the participation of its uniquely diverse and multinational audience and associates in this timely program, making it possible with their support to continue our mission of shared learning for a more peaceful world, an effort that ITC has continually led month after month for 15 uninterrupted years. Thank you all. During this video conference, we will look at some strategies for organizational change to include framework and activities. This is the fourth International Training Center video conference of the year 2003 series entitled Strategies for Competitive Performance. I'm Richard Page of the Page Firm, a law firm specializing in international business litigation, arbitration, and mediation, and the moderator of today's program. In recent years, managerial literature and practice has been characterized by numerous buzzwords and canned formulas that promote terms and phrases related to self-motivation and management change, including X habits for success, organizational reinvention, global quality, business process improvement, and others. The fact is that every organization or community of interest is truly different, and its own challenges and needs for change and adaptation. Executives, managers, and workers should never forget that they have the freedom to create, plan, and implement their own change efforts towards the achievement of their goals without having to force-fit any mass-produced management technique. This video conference will propose frameworks for all your change needs, criteria to evaluate the type and level of change your organization needs, and knowledge to create and implement plans aligned to your strategic goals and objectives. The distinguished invited speaker will discuss the main messages of his recent best-selling book on organized change, reflecting his more than 20 years of professional practice and consulting around the world. Our presenter for this program is David Chaudron, Managing Partner of Organized Change, a consulting firm focusing on practical designs for major change efforts, training, team building, one-on-one coaching of management, and the development of training systems. Dr. Chaudron has assisted organizations in planning their strategies, changing their organizations, surveying their employees, building their teams, and improving the leadership styles of their executives. He has worked internationally in North America, South America, Europe, and the Middle East. Dr. Chaudron is the author of No More Darn Buzzwords, Keys to Successful Organized Change. He has also authored over a dozen articles on total quality, organizational change, and was a columnist for the President Newsletter, a publication of the American Management Association known as the AMA. Dr. Chaudron holds a BA in psychology from the University of Arizona, an MS in industrial organizational psychology from California State University, Long Beach, and a Ph.D. in industrial psychology from Alliant International University in San Diego. Welcome back, and thanks for being with us today. I'd like to begin by asking you a question, actually three questions. The world is going through profound transformation in government, business, education, and civil society. Why is organized change without managerial buzzwords so essential today in these four contexts? Do we all need to change to adapt to each other individually, organizationally, and as communities? Or is this something more important or important only for managers?
Well, it certainly isn't just important for managers, it's really important for everyone. Part of the reason is that organizations, teams, and individuals, both when they react to change and look at change, frankly tend to feel anxiety about dealing with it. And when we feel that kind of anxiety, usually we try to grab at straws to try to find something that will solve the immediate problem in front of us. Unfortunately, often these solutions that we grab are often these buzzwords, and that they may solve our problem in the short term. Unfortunately, in the long term, they don't. And that's true for organizations, teams, and individuals.
Thank you. Let's begin now with Module 1.
Thank you very much for inviting me today. I'm going to talk about no more darn buzzwords, keys to successful organized change. First, I want to tell you a little bit about why I think this topic is important and what hopefully you can actually get out of this particular session. It's been my experience that so many companies have implemented buzzwords over the course of the years that they very oftentimes become very irritated and frankly disgusted at the results whenever they try to implement a particular buzzword. Oftentimes that the results that they hope to materialize never do. And on top of that, very often there is a great resistance to change that occurs whenever a buzzword is implemented, whatever particular kind of buzzword it is. And unfortunately, besides the issues with implementing any kind of buzzword, you also have so many of them. Buzzwords come about once every 5 minutes, I think, and it's really an attempt for consultants to consolidate and package what they have learned so they can sell it to organizations. Unfortunately, because there are so many consultants, there are often so very many buzzwords. And as you can see in my own buzzword create-o-matic, you actually can be creating your own buzzword. Just choose one word from each column and you'd be amazed about how many past, current, and future buzzwords you can be creating in this manner. And because there are so many, what our organizations often do is they implement what I call management by bestseller. That is, they buy a particular book and they say, oh, we have to implement this whole thing, without a full consideration what their current situation is, and frankly speaking, what their requirements really are to become successful. I've summarized these various kinds of organizational issues and organizational change in what I call the 9 illnesses. These 9 are: first, the need-technique mismatch, where the goals of the organization are not properly matched to the techniques the organization is using to achieve those goals. Second, not making systematic changes. That is, not making the system-wide, systematic kind of changes that are necessary for organizational success to occur. The third illness is the overuse of teams. To give one bad example, I was talking with one particular local organization that had 300 people that happened to have 70 process action teams working at once. That is obviously way, way too many. And while certainly project teams are useful, they certainly can be overused. Fourth, oftentimes organizations don't make the proper decisions up front. That is, they don't conduct a thorough decision-making process as to what their current situation is, what they wish to achieve, and how they need to get there. Fifth, organizations are often caught between the square peg and the NIH diseases, which I will explain here. A square peg disease is where organizations try to fit a buzzword, just like we've talked about, into an organization, oftentimes with disastrous results. Other organizations play and use the, get this, the not invented here disease. The NIH disease occurs when organizations refuse to learn from any other place, and they insist on creating their own process or processes and refuse to learn from other people's mistakes. The sixth illness is mass training, where organizations use broad training objectives, broad training courses, and teach everyone and everything on a particular topic without really looking at the specific training requirements that are necessary for that particular job and for that particular organizational change. The seventh illness is the no top management support excuse. In this case, people in the organization absolutely refuse to do anything unless it has been blessed by the CEO, president, or the head of the organization. And while top management support is very necessary in organizational change, sometimes one has to go forward with organizational change even though the commitment is not completely 100%. Next to last of these illnesses is labelitis. Labelitis is where organizations take and implement a particular kind of buzzword which turns out to be just like the other disease. Unfortunately, in this particular case, what managers do is they refuse to do anything related to any other particular kind of buzzword. I was working with one organization that refused to do anything team-based because they were implementing total quality management. They were so stuck on one particular focus and on one particular viewpoint that, as a result, they actually couldn't go forward and look at other kinds of techniques and methods that might be very beneficial to them. Ninth and last, but not least, is the not measuring results illness. With this illness, organizations have an unclear expectation as to what needs to be accomplished. They do not have a good measurement system to accommodate that, and as a result, when they implement organizational change, they don't know what they're getting because they haven't been measuring how well they have been succeeding. As a result, organizations oftentimes implement massive quality systems such as Six Sigma and ISO 9000 without a clear expectation as to results. So given all of these 9 illnesses and given these situations, what do you do? Well, here's where we come to the objectives of this particular session. First of all, I'd like to help our clients, you, decide when to do what. And that is perhaps the most important thing because oftentimes buzzwords are not just bad or good, they are good only under certain circumstances and under certain conditions. Secondly, to link the various techniques and buzzwords into an aligned, consistent whole. Oftentimes a buzzword is implemented, frankly, all to good effect, but because there are no supporting surrounding changes that need to occur, the buzzword implementation often fails. Thirdly, to fill in the gap when a buzzword is chosen. So if your organization has chosen a particular buzzword, what kind of things should be kept in mind when that particular buzzword is being used on a day-to-day kind of basis? And I'd like to help you make whatever you implement as buzzword-free as possible. I'd like to help you in your own effort creating your unique implementation plan, one that's appropriate to your circumstances that still takes into account the lessons learned by other organizations. Let's begin with the 4 keys. What I've found in our 22 years of research and experience is that there are 4 keys to organizational change, sans buzzwords, as close as we can get to it. These 4 keys include framework questions, assessment and measurement, teamwork and consensus, and training and learning. Using these keys will allow you to customize organizational change to your particular organization's circumstances and increase the probability of successful change. First, let me talk about the framework questions. These particular questions are those that really should be asked up front before any particular organizational change is being considered or used. First of all, who should be on the steering committee for this particular kind of organizational change? Who is on the committee and what they do is a very critical and important decision because that steering committee should be conducting the initial assessments and the gathering of information. The committee members should be deciding on the scope of change. They should also be deciding in terms of how to gain consensus in the organization, how to ensure that whatever is decided upon is implemented, to evaluate what is going on, and how to make lessons learned, and how to improve upon what they do. I will be talking about the initial assessments that steering committees should perform in a few minutes. Within these framework questions, one of the things the steering committee needs to decide is the scope of the change. And what that really boils down to is one question: where do you get started in the organizational change cycle? There are 4 broad categories in terms of the types of change an organization can undergo. The first one is shaping and anticipating the future, which is what we call level 1 kind of change. The next particular kind of change is defining what businesses one should be in. That is doing what we call core competency analysis, and what we describe as level 2 kinds of changes. The third particular type of change is re-engineering internal processes, what we call level 3, and incrementally improving processes, what we call level 4. You may be thinking to yourself, at what level do I start? At what level should my organization start? I mean, you're talking about a pretty wide variety of changes right here. Give me some information to help me decide about what level our organization should start with. Well, what level you should start with depends upon a number of different factors. First of all, how much risk can you take? If you are a very risk-averse organization, it is very unlikely that radical change will occur. The second particular kind of factor to look at is how much change from current conditions is needed. So if there is only a small gap between future requirements and current conditions, only modest change needs to occur. But if that gap is big, if the difference between what needs to happen and what is happening is large, that suggests that the more powerful kind of techniques should be used, that is the level 1 and the level 2 techniques. Another particular factor to look at is how much change you are willing to implement. Just because an organization needs to change doesn't mean that there's a consensus in the organization to make any particular kind of change. And fourthly, the degree of consensus and amount of power you have. You very well may be willing to take a risk. You very well may have a big gap between how much change is necessary and what the current conditions are. You personally may be very willing to undergo certain kind of changes. However, if there isn't a high degree of consensus in the organization and there is very limited power to change things, organizational change is still likely to fail. One other factor to look at is the time horizon. If you're looking for and want to find immediate short-term kinds of results, start with level 4 techniques, that is, incrementally improving existing processes. In a well-structured kind of project focus, level 4 techniques can significantly give you good bang for your buck. Examples of level 4 techniques we'll talk about in more detail later, and are such things as total quality management, Six Sigma, and process improvement teams. However, if you want your organization to survive in the long run, you must start by using level 1 techniques. That is, looking at the future or possible futures and seeing how your organization can survive and grow in these particular futures. Let's talk in more detail about level 1 techniques. We'll talk about the remaining techniques in a moment. Level 1 techniques are commonly known as scenario planning, where an organization develops and looks at different possible futures about what might occur and develops scenarios in accordance with those possible futures. Taking this information, management develops as to how best the organization can succeed if that particular future plays out. The accompanying flowchart will show you in some detail how to do this. Where one builds scenarios, you build various likely stories, almost like newspaper stories, around each particular scenario. You identify what particular kind of indicators there are for each scenario. An indicator is what kind of signposts or ideas will give you the indication that that particular scenario will be coming about. You identify various opportunities in each scenario that might come about for the organization and that the organization may be able to take advantage of. And then you define the consequences and the threat for the organization that may manifest themselves if that particular scenario plays out. Usually, there are about 3 to 4 scenarios that are actually used with this particular kind of scenario planning. After the scenario planning is done, level 2 work usually begins. Level 2 work is often called core competency analysis, if you want to put a buzzword on it. And that first starts with what's called a SWOT analysis. That is, an analysis of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. One thing to be very careful about here, however, is to realize that the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats may be different from scenario to scenario. For example, in one organization, a particular description of the organization and the capability of the organization very well might be a strength. In a different scenario, however, the capability of an organization may become a weakness. For example, when we were working with one of our clients who happened to be a major oil producer, they realized that their major strength was to produce oil. However, as a result of that, if oil becomes less and less necessary, they realized that their dependence on that strength, their dependence upon the production of oil, could very well become a weakness and a crutch that could stop them from developing new and alternative sources of profit for their company. After one looks at the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats for each scenario, one can then also go on to what's called Level 3 and Level 4 work. Now, Level 3 work and Level 4 work come after Level 2 work, preferably after you've looked at the various possible scenarios for the future and you've decided what your core competencies are and what they need to be in the future. Now you're looking at your internal processes. That is, the operations and systems and day-to-day activities that the company uses to perform its day-to-day work. After an assessment is done, the organization can decide whether its internal processes need significant, large-scale change, or whether they can get away with small, incremental change to its internal work processes. Large-scale change can be called process redesign, process design, or re-engineering, and that is where organizations start with a blank slate and recreate its new process that is more efficient and more effective. Level 4 work focuses in on incremental, small-scale change over a long period of time. And this usually has two variations. Variation 1 is frankly and unfortunately is often done, where there is a massive implementation and training, usually a tremendous amount of data collection is done, and implementation of a whole lot of projects without a clear focus as what to do. The second variation of Level 4 work is where strategically focused teams, by using selective implementation and selective training of those teams, choose projects that are especially focused on what they actually need to do. The team then receives very specific training and they implement selected projects. Besides talking about the level kind of questions, the other thing the steering committee needs to keep in mind is what kind of implementation plan should be done. Now, to some extent, implementation plans are really relatively independent of what level one chooses. The process and the factor one needs to look at and the rules one should go by really are pretty much the same. What is different about implementation at the various levels of organizational change isn't process, it's content. Level 1 and Level 2 work might require the company to significantly change its focus, shedding non-performing businesses and develop or buying new business lines. Level 3 and Level 4 work might require an organization to change its information system, integrate suppliers tightly into its inventory management system, and tie pay to company profitability. Regardless of the level, SMART plans need to be created. And if you're not familiar with SMART plans, they need to be specific, measurable, agreed upon, realistic, and time-bound. The key to creating these SMART goals and these SMART plans are achieved by what we call our equation of success. That is, making sure that one's implementation plans have good measurement systems, that effective techniques and methods are used, and that you have sufficient control over implementation. Focused persistence is applied, and that there is a consensus about what needs to be done. We will talk about measurement systems in the next module of this presentation. Let's talk about techniques and methods. If, based on your assessment, you find that major change is needed, then major techniques and methods should be used. These major methods include restructuring, tying pay to performance, adding resources, changing customer or products, re-engineering processes, and change in strategy. If, based on your assessment, you find that you need minor changes in your organization, you can use minor techniques and methods to accomplish your goal. These methods include motivational speeches, problem-solving teams focused on technical issues, Six Sigma, etc. In addition to techniques and methods, other parts of the equation of success include focused persistence, otherwise known as a good plan, and a consensus in the organization that organizational change is necessary and that it is being implemented well. A good plan involves making specific tasks and specific assignments with beginning and end dates, as well as making sure that the plan is on track. An excellent way to visually demonstrate progress of your implementation is a Gantt chart, as shown in this graphic. A Gantt chart shows what tasks need to be accomplished, who must do them, their beginning and their end dates, and how tasks are linked together. In addition, Gantt charts can show the percentage of completion for each task. To summarize, organizations that want to successfully improve the framework questions I talked about, along with the equation for success, can significantly increase the chances for a successful implementation of organizational change.
Let's begin with the first question and answer session. We will try to answer as many questions as possible. Therefore, we ask that only one question be asked per phone call, and that these questions be as brief as possible. You may call the studio directly at the phone numbers or fax which appear on your screen. We remind you to make your phone calls at a distance from the monitor to avoid feedback. While we're waiting for the first telephone call to come in, tell me a little bit about the book, would you?
That book was really done, really speaking to, I don't know what I'm looking over there. Really, I did the book primarily as a sense of frustration, because one time, to tell you a little story, I actually, a manager came to me and says, "Hi, we need to change this. We're going in this direction instead of this direction." And all that I had to do was do a find and replace in Microsoft Word, and everything changed. So literally, all he really wanted was a change in the buzzword, and that's it. And I've come across that so much and so often. That's really the reason that I wrote the book, was the emotion of frustration that I came from that.
Well, we'll come back to that in a little bit. I want to hear more about that. Right now, we've got a telephone call.
Okay.
It is from Colombia. It is from the Federación Nacional de Comerciantes, known as FENALCO, in Medellín, Colombia.
Good morning. My question is the following. The process of change starts with realizing the need for change and ends with implementation. How do we determine the speed of the change and orient the change so that we can analyze the results?
That I can give you a really long answer to your question, but the short answer to your question really is in terms of deciding upfront what kind of measurement system you need to have. How do you know that your organization is going to be successful in whatever that you are planning? And that really needs to be nailed down, to use an American expression, really speaking, before you can go on, because that really depends upon the particulars of your own circumstances, and it's hard to give a blanket answer, but you have to think about that very deeply before one actually implements a change.
Give us a little more of the long answer, if you would,
Sure.
on that question.
Is very oftentimes organizations, what they do is that they say, you know what, we have this problem, we need to implement this particular kind of change, but they don't really look at their overall measurement system in terms of finances, or in terms of accounting, or in terms of market share, profitability, customer focus. They don't really look at those large-scale kind of measurement questions. They simply assume that whatever measurement system that they have in place is okay and adequate to serve their new needs, and that very well may be an incorrect assumption to make.
Thank you. Our next question is from Mexico. It is from the Colegio de Bachilleres Estado de Sinaloa in Guamuchil, in the state of Sinaloa in Mexico.
Good morning.